I wonder if any investors ever thought about the fact that the number of people living alone in Australia is actually 1 in 4 people. So 25% of us actually live in a dwelling on our own. But if you think about that internationally, it's actually pretty average. Because if you think about Scandinavia, which is 34%, and Sweden, which is 49%, almost 1 in 2 people actually live alone. So my question today is, what does that actually mean for property investors where this household type is increasing? And for me, I think we should really strongly consider using 1-bedroom apartments as part of our investment strategy. So I've always said that if you think about it in terms of the context, we've got to get the strategy right first, we've got to get the location right second, and then we've got to get the property third. And quite often, I've talked often about the fact that people get that the other way around. They do property first, suburb second, and maybe strategy later. But if I've sort of identified a suburb that's investment grade that I should identify, and I don't have a budget to buy a townhouse or a house, or maybe not even be able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment, my invitation to the investor is to consider buying a 1-bedroom apartment. Because not only do they make for a great investment if you get the right one, you're obviously buying into an increasing trend with household types in this country. So what are the advantages of buying a 1-bedroom apartment? The first one is really obvious. It's affordable. To buy in a great suburb a 1-bedroom apartment, clearly you're going to save a lot of money than if you buy a 2-bedroom or a townhouse or a house. So that's a clear advantage of buying a 1-bedroom apartment. The other one is you can get into a better area. So assume that you're buying a 1-bedroom apartment, let's call it $400,000 in a good area, and you may go 50 k's out to buy a 3-bedroom house. The difference is quite dramatic in terms of those locations. So you are buying into a much better area, and as we know, location will do 80% of the heavy lifting. Now, as opposed to 2-bedroom apartments, there's reduced strata fees because you get a smaller entitlement, contribution entitlement within the body corporate. So therefore, as a percentage of the overall fees that they need to collect, you actually pay a little bit less. But on the flip side of that, you get a little bit less voting rights when it comes to the body corporate meetings. But I think that'll balance itself out pretty well. And of course, if you have a smaller property, it's lower maintenance, so less money that's coming out of your pocket. And the thing to keep in mind too with 1-bedroom, it's not just apartments. I've actually seen 1-bedroom houses before, and they're quite often small character houses that are 1-bedroom. So you're not just limited to one particular asset type. And the other thing I think is an advantage, if you've been shared living for some time, you know, flatmates, housemates, and you move in on your own, you can sort of have a really great alternative to that shared living arrangement. So what's the downside? Well, the first one really is often there's a bigger deposit. Usually the banks only like to lend up to 80%. They usually get uncomfortable above 80%. So you need to be sure that you do have that extra deposit. And the other thing is that if you have less, quite often 50 square metres and above is the benchmark for the banks to feel comfortable. And a lot of 1-bedroom apartments are less than 50 square metres. So that actually does have an impact on lending. So I would suggest to someone who is investing in a 1-bedroom apartment that they would make sure that they stay above 50 square metres, because they're harder to find, but they certainly do exist. So what do you actually look for if you're buying a 1-bedroom apartment? The first thing for me is definitely scarcity. So I've said on many of these sessions, these how-to videos, that you should buy established apartments over brand new ones, and that still remains because I can get that scarcity. In those older sort of 50s, 60s and 70s blocks, there's much less of them in the block, and it makes it easier for us to get a standard of living and a quality of life with less people, which I think is a real advantage. The other thing to look for is parking. Now, if you can get car parking on title, that's going to make your apartment stand out head and shoulders above the rest of the competition. So that's really, really important to get that. When it comes to the amenities, no pool, no caretaker, no lift, no concierge. Do away with all of those things because it's going to have a dramatic impact in a positive way on the amount of strata fees that you need to pay. And also, my invitation is to make sure you look for a really good floor plan. So think about if you are living on your own and you've got a friend coming over, do you actually want them to go through your bedroom to go to the toilet, or would you prefer the toilet to be separate? Do you want a little bit of a hallway if you can? These are the sorts of things, separate toilet, a little hallway, that'll help increase the size, which will get you over that 50 square metre size, which the banks definitely love. And then the last thing for me to think about is some outdoor space. If you're living in a smaller area on your own, you do need to connect with nature and the outside world. So as a minimum, look for a balcony. But if you can find one on the ground floor with a courtyard with a bit of outdoor space, that is going to make it enormously scarce and therefore put upwards pressure on the value of your investment. So my message today is really clear that one-bedroom apartments are often frowned at by investors, but given the fact that the household type is increasing more and more to loan people households and affordability is getting harder and harder, I see a real increase in demand in this type of property, and therefore I think the investor should embrace this as an asset type in their property portfolio.